Chapter 1 Hatching. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A/N. The story really starts in Chapter 1. The prologue just establishes the main character and explains her circumstances. If you are not interested, feel free to skip it and go to the first chapter. Though as the author I recommend reading it. Also, the prologue is very dark. You have been warned. When Evelyn awoke, the first thing she noticed was that everything was dark. She tried to move, but her entire body seemed to be restrained. And no matter how hard she tried, nothing would budge. Ugh, what happened? Where am I? The instance after she thought this, her last memory resurfaced, and she instinctively tried to reach towards her throat, which suddenly burst into searing pain. The last thing she remembered was having her throat sliced, and the lingering feeling from that immeasurable pain seemed to have followed her like a phantom. However, after a few moments the pain was gone, as she realized there was no injury to her throat, and she in fact did not feel any pain at all. What is going on? I could have sworn that bastard killed me. Did I maybe start to hallucinate, and he had actually moved me somewhere else? Evelyn continued to struggle, but it was all for naught, as her body was still restricted and nothing she did seemed to work. Arg, where the hell has that bastard put me? Was chaining me to the ceiling not enough, he had to put me in an incredibly cramped, wet and warm box. Wait, why is it warm and wet? After calming down a bit, she started to focus on her body. Really trying to get a feel for her situation. Once she had finished expanding her senses and understanding the condition of her body, she realized that something was very wrong. Not only was she restrained, but she could not feel her hands, and her feet felt like they were missing some parts. Feeling that something was terribly wrong, Evelyn began to panic, shaking violently, trying to free herself from what she perceived to be the next act of torture her captor was subjecting her to. Eventually, though, when she had exhausted herself, she tried calming back down to understand what was going on. Was burning, cutting and beating us not enough? Now he has cut off my hands and mutilated my feet. Us. Mason, God, where is my brother? I thought I saw him get killed as well, but if I am still alive, maybe that was also a hallucination. Evelyn tried with renewed vigor to look around and find her brother, but her head was firmly locked in place and the only thing she could perceive was darkness. She tried desperately to call out, but even her mouth could not move, and she was unable to make a sound of any kind. This is bad. Has he just decided to leave me to die of thirst? Did he bury me or something? No, if I was buried underground with how confined things are, I would probably suffocate. Soon Evelyn realized the futility of her situation, and simply resigned herself. She had already figured she would die when she was first kidnapped. In fact, she had already thought she had died, so giving up again was not too hard for her now that she knew there was no way out. However, instead of dying slowly, she seemed to be getting stronger as time went on. She could feel her muscles growing and her bones strengthening. It was all so weird to her. She wondered how she could be having a growth spurt without eating or drinking anything, and because she had already finished growing a little after she turned 15. Evelyn sat in this state of perpetual darkness and restraint, getting stronger and stronger for what seemed like days, when she finally felt her confines give a little. At first it was just the smallest amount of extra room, but soon she began forcing her way out, moving her body wildly. She could hear and feel that whatever was confining her was cracking, even if she could still not see it. She continues to thrash about, finding that using her head was the most effective since her arms and legs were still not reacting very well. Soon she heard a loud cracking sound, and with one more massive headbutt broke out of whatever confined her. Ha, I am free. No longer held in whatever prison she had been placed in. Evelyn tried to look around at her surroundings. However, all she could see were tufts of fluff in front of her eyes. She tried to shake her head and move it from side to side to knock the fluff off, but it seemed to move with her, and all of her efforts proved to be for naught. Great, did he glue some cotton balls in front of my eyes or something? I guess I will just have to try to feel my way around. Evelyn then tried to move forward, but immediately fell over onto her face. She started flailing around trying to get back up, but to no avail. Come on, work legs and arms. Ugh, why are they so short and useless all of a sudden? It is like I have chicken legs of something. Yet in the moment after that thought, Evelyn abruptly stopped moving. She finally realized what was wrong. She was not missing her hands, she never had any, and her legs really were like those of a chicken. No, 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 no. This is not happening, there is no way I am some type of bird now. Evelyn tried as hard as she could to deny it, she figured this was a dream, or maybe she was on some psychedelic drugs. Anything other than what was reality. Unfortunately, she could only stay in denial for so long, because she soon felt something pushing against her, followed by a hoot hoot. Hearing this, she knew that everything she had experienced was reality. She tried calling out with her voice, but all that came out were a few cute squeaks, that confirmed her fears. She had been reborn as an owl. This is shit, an owl. I could have at least been a crocodile or a lion or something else really big and powerful. However, as she thought about it more, Evelyn came to grips with her new life and even figured it was not so bad. I guess it could have been worse, I could have ended up as an ant or some other insect. She thought while imaging plenty of animals that would have been worse. After collecting herself for a few minutes, Evelyn eventually tried all manner of things she had seen in games or read about in novels, yet as much as she tried, no sort of system or message appeared to guide her in her new life. She was once again having to start from scratch, albeit with her memories intact. When she had finally given up on trying to activate some sort of system or cheat ability, she wobbly tried to stand up again, but once more face planted into the soft nest. Curse my stupidly oversized head. Why do owls have to have such unbalanced bodies as soon as they are born? Evelyn thought, annoyed by her current situation. At this point she had become tired and decided to give up for now. She knew it was only a matter of time before she would be able to move around. After laying there for what seemed like hours, Evelyn heard what sounded like another creature landing down in the nest. She wondered why she did not hear anything until it was that close, but then she remembered that owls had incredibly quiet wings. She then heard another round of hooting, but this time instead of just one owl hooting there were two. Evelyn figured that her new father must have come back to the nest and her mood immediately soured. Just thinking of the word father had made her remember all of the terrible things her own had done to her. And if it was not for her brother, she figured she would have written the entire male population off as scum. Of course, Evelyn deep down knew that her new owl dad was unlikely to abuse her, since maliciously beating children was a predominantly human trait. However, just the mere thought of her past father made her angry. And after what had happened the last time she trusted someone, she was not going to open up to anyone or thing readily. Soon though, Evelyn felt a large beak pressing against hers, and she could immediately feel that there was something in the other beak. After a few moments she recognized the feel of what was being pressed against her, it was raw meat. Evelyn reflexively recoiled in disgust, trying to move her new beak away from the raw meat. Much to the dismay of her mother that was trying to feed her. Nevertheless, after Evelyn had moved her head away from the raw meat, she felt an instinctual hunger in her stomach that was hard to resist. She then heard her mother, or who she assumed to be her mother, let out some angry hoots before forcefully pulling Evelyn over and shoving the meat into her beak. Evelyn wanted to spit the meat out, but her new owl body had other ideas. Before she realized it, she had already eaten all of the meat given to her, marking the end of her first meal as an owl and the beginning of her new existence. Chapter 22 New Family. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Since Evelyn had woken up and found herself to have been reborn as an owl, she had found out a number of new things in the past few days. The first was that she was not the only egg to hatch in her nest, but that she had two siblings as well. She was able to tell this when just a day after she had hatched, when two more distinct squeaks began echoing through the nest. She thought that there might be more possible new siblings that were late hatchers, but after one more day she heard nothing new other than the sounds of her siblings and parents. The next new thing she found was when she was finally able to see, and she saw her mother for the first time. In front of her was an owl like she had never seen, because it had a slick coat of silver and shimmering green feathers. Evelyn was pretty sure that there were no owls that looked like this back on Earth. Although she did not know every owl species, so maybe it was possible. However, after observing her new nest and mother, Evelyn became certain that she was no longer on Earth. This was because after getting a good scale of her nest she realized that it easily had a radius of 20.5 feet and that her mother was at least 8 feet tall. At first, she thought that it might just seem that big because of her new baby owl body, but after moving around the nest she found something to use as a scale. She had found something she was very familiar with, because she used to have 10 of them. The bone of a human finger. When she first saw this, she reeled back and got as far away from it as possible. However, she soon realized how useful it would be for her to get a measure of the things around her. So, I really did end up in a world other than Earth. Either that or this is so far in the future that there are giant owls, though that seems just as or even more far-fetched. I suppose it really does not matter. I will be able to find out more about where I am once I unlock my greatest advantage. The ability to fly. After she had a good understanding of the layout of her new home, Evelyn found her new siblings that had not moved since hatching and were currently still under their mother. Of course, this was the normal behavior for a baby owl, and Evelyn's new mother wondered why her eldest daughter was so adventurous. Once she had a good view of them, she studied how they looked in order to get a better understanding of what she herself looked like. Unfortunately, there were not many distinct features for her to glean from her siblings, since they were pretty much just gray fluff balls with eyes. I guess I must look pretty similar to them as well. I wonder how long it is going to be until I can fly. Staying here in the nest is incredibly boring. It was only moments after that thought when Evelyn heard the soft sound of something landing outside. She then looked towards the entrance to see her new owl dad come in, holding a large boar in his talons. Her father looked quite similar to her mother, although he was about a foot taller, and along with silver and shimmering green feathers he had a few red ones around his neck. She watched as her father skillfully hopped across the nest right up to her mother, and the two began conversing with a few hoots and coos, before rubbing their head together in a show of affection. Seeing this made Evelyn's heart grow heavy, as she remembered her mother and father on Earth, and how at one time, they were actually happy. Although it felt like an eternity ago for her. Her new owl parents then separated, and the father owl left the boar he had just brought, before hopping back towards the exit and flying away. Presumably to get more food. Evelyn, seeing her mother start to tear into the boar and feed her siblings, waddled over, since she had already come to accept that if she wanted to survive, she had to eat what was provided. After she had gotten her share of the food, Evelyn flopped over onto her head and went to sleep. Hoping that her boring days would be over soon, and that she would be able to soar through the sky. The next 2 weeks went by with pretty much the same routine for Evelyn: eat, sleep, repeat. There was pretty much nothing else she could do since it only took her a couple of days to explore the entirety of the nest, which was situated in the middle of a tree hollow. This made it impossible for Evelyn to see more than the endless foliage outside the hole that served as the entrance and exit for her new home. And as she was currently still too small to get over the lip of the hole, her view was limited. At the very least her body had rounded out a bit and had caught up with her large head, making her balance much better. She had also come to a realization about her new siblings. They are both dumb as bricks. The two of them had done nothing but lay around, and when the mood strikes them do some hopping around, often into the walls of the nest. They also made a bunch of noise, chirping like madmen whenever their father came back with food. Of course, this was actually how a normal newborn owl baby was supposed to act, and both of Evelyn's parents were a bit unsure about what might be wrong with her. She was far too adventurous ever since she was born. Always trying to move around, and her mother even caught her once stacking objects to try and get over the lip of the tree hollow. Such an intelligent child, she is definitely going to be a handful when she begins to fly. Evelyn's new mother thought. Yes, her parents were well aware that Evelyn displayed above-average intelligence for her age. Normally it would not be until much later that she would be smart enough to use objects to her advantage. Ugh, another attempt to see beyond this prison of a nest thwarted. I have to say my new mom is a real helicopter parent. Whenever I get close to getting a view of the outside, she pulls me back into the nest. I also doubt she has been outside of the nest for more than 30 minutes since me and my siblings hatched over 2 weeks ago. However, Evelyn's chance to get a view beyond the nest soon came. When one day her father did not come home on time, and their mother reluctantly left the nest to look for him. Now is my chance, I need to be quick so that I am not stopped halfway through again. Evelyn then went to collect whatever she could. From the bones of past meals and some of the thicker branches that made up the nest that she could get loose. After around 2 hours she had made a respectable staircase that she used to get her head over the lip, and look out beyond the walls she had been confined in. Wow! This was the first thought that went through Evelyn's mind as she peered out into the expanse around her. The first thing she saw was the endless forest of massive trees that extended like an ocean. However, even beyond that she was able to see mountains that towered into the sky, some of them with peaks that were so tall she could not see the top. How big must those mountains be for me to be able to see them from this far away, but still not see their tops? I am certain that there were no mountains like that on Earth. So that confirms it, I am on another planet. Evelyn then moved her head from side to side, which was quite easy now that she was an owl and could rotate her head nearly 360 degrees. Looking to her right, she saw a massive lake that glimmered like a beautiful gem under the light of the sun, and to her left were well just more trees. But the lake was still nice to look at. Evelyn then leaned her body forward as far as she could, hoping to get a look at the ground. Sadly, the branches and leaves of the trees were too thick, and she could not see the ground below her. Yet it was at this moment that one of her siblings ran into the makeshift staircase she had made and caused her to lose her balance and fall forward. Oh crap! As she fell, Evelyn tried to grasp at the lip of the tree hollow, but her talons scraped against the wood, unable to find a purchase. She then began to fall, descending towards the floor of the forest. BDNV. Chapter 3 The Dangerous Floor of the Forest. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Falling out of the tree hollow that had been her home since becoming an owl, Evelyn's eyes went wide as she plummeted towards the ground. Luckily, as she fell, her tiny owl body unable to resist the pull of gravity, the dense and massive leaves of the tree slowed her fall. She landed on leaf after leaf, which slowly gave way to her weight, before sending her falling a few feet down to the next one. This process continued for almost half an hour, until Evelyn finally saw the floor of the forest. Bang! Falling the last couple of feet onto the forest floor, Evelyn felt pain for the first time in her new life. Still, she was used to pain, and since nothing was broken, she soon got a hold of herself and took a look around. Unfortunately, everything around her looked relatively the same. There were just trees and bushes as far as the eye could see. Great, am I going to die again? Just when I had finally come to terms with being an owl, this happens. And I was actually really looking forward to flying. Her new life as an owl having taken a very unfortunate turn, Evelyn prepared herself for the worst. No, I do not want to die again. However, her will to live blazed up inside her, and her determination rose. She was still alive, and this one setback was not going to be the end of her. When my new owl mother comes back, she will look for me, I am sure. She has shown that she cares about me and my dumb siblings. I just need to wait here, and she will come along. Yet as Evelyn waited, and more time went by, fear began to creep back into her mind. She was starting to believe that her mother, or even her father for that matter, did not care about her. Maybe they were happy that they no longer had another mouth to feed, and it was good riddance. Of course, this was far from the truth, but Evelyn's past life experiences had certainly not given her the greatest outlook on life. I wanted to save this as a last resort, but here goes nothing. Following her instincts, Evelyn opened her beak wide, and began emitting a high-pitched screeching sound. This was the best sound of distress she could make, and she hoped by some miracle one of her parents would hear her and come to the rescue. But unbeknownst to Evelyn, something else heard her cry. And while it may have been a cry for help to her parents, for any other being, it was the sound of an easy meal. Screeching out into the forest for nearly 3 minutes, Evelyn's throat began to get sore, and she had to stop, the feelings of despair coming back. Yet, her determination quickly flared up, and she decided that if no one was going to come and save her, she would have to make it on her own. I may have to dig up grubs or worms to eat, but I am not going to die. I just need to survive until I can fly, and then everything should turn out okay. After getting herself amped up, Evelyn began digging at the ground aiming to get her food supply early. Of course, the thought of eating worms and grubs disgusted her, but she had been eating God knows what from whatever her parents brought back. So, she was already beginning to get used to eating things that were against her original human sensibilities. Ha, got you. And she luckily did not have to wait long until she dug up some sort of grub, though it looked a bit different than from the ones on Earth. For one thing, it was quite a bit larger, being about 1/10 the size Evelyn was currently, and having an earthy red hue instead of white. Come on, stop struggling. Evelyn thought as the grub began whipping its body back and forth, resisting her with all its might. Her battle with the grub continued for a good minute as she tried to pin it down with her baby owl physique, and it constantly dove back into the ground to rebury itself. Eventually Evelyn's fight against the grub turned in her favor, as she was able to get both of her feet on top of it and grip it tightly with her small talons. After that she bent down to rip its head off with her beak and finish the job. Whoosh! As she bent her head over, she felt something fly right above her, nearly nailing her in the back of the head. Whipping her head around 180 degrees, Evelyn just barely caught the sight of what had just tried to attack her. Clinging to a nearby tree, was some sort of lizard that Evelyn could only best describe as chameleon-esque, had both of its eyes pinned directly on her, and its long tongue was still outstretched, stuck to a root not far from her. Seeing this, Evelyn knew what had just happened and that her life was still in danger. This chameleon-like animal was easily 7 times bigger than her, and definitely saw her as easy prey. Moving into action, Evelyn began waddle jumping as fast as she could move away, hoping to somehow escape the predator that was after her. Whoosh! The chameleon reeled in its tongue like lightning and lashed it out again. However, instead of aiming for Evelyn, who it did not think could get away, the chameleon had targeted the grub she had dug up, not wanting to let the creature escape back into the ground. Unfortunately, this was just the appetizer for this beast, and it had set its sights on Evelyn for the main course. Scrambling along, Evelyn frantically did her best to run away, but her small developing owl body did not allow for much haste. Once again hearing the sound of the chameleon's tongue coming out, Evelyn jumped to the side and threw her body to the ground to avoid being ensnared. Unfortunately, her movement had failed to get her completely out of the way, and she watched in horror as the tongue hit the edge of one of her wings. But by some miracle, when the chameleon reeled back its tongue, it did not have a good enough grip and only ripped out a few dozen of her feathers. Still, panic was setting in, as adrenaline pumped through her body, trying to give her the boost she needed to survive. I am not going to die, I am not going to die. Evelyn thought, trying to keep her fear from freezing up her body. Soon she saw it, her hope for salvation. One of the roots of the large tree had a small opening where it lifted up from the ground, and Evelyn moved towards it with all her might, hoping to find shelter from the chameleon's attacks. Yet as the chameleon noticed where Evelyn was headed, it hastily shot out its tongue, this time not playing around and using its full speed that Evelyn had no chance of evading with her sluggish movements. Except this had been what Evelyn had been waiting for, as she quickly turned her head all the way around. And in her beak, she had picked up a piece of fallen bark, which she used as a shield to block the chameleon's tongue. Swiftly she let go of the bark and moved the last few inches to the raised root and pushed herself under, as the chameleon reeled its tongue back in and angrily crushed the piece of bark in its mouth. The chameleon then tried to fire back towards Evelyn again, but even though it retracted its tongue as fast as possible, it just missed as Evelyn buried herself under the tree root. Once inside, for a moment Evelyn felt like she was going to find some other terrifying creature, but all was quite under the root other than a few insects which scurried away from her. The space was actually quite small and just barely had enough room for her to properly hide in. Crunch. 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 Not long after she had pushed herself up against the far corner of the hole, she heard the rustling of leaves outside, before a large shadow blocked out the light that was flowing into her sanctuary. Seeing this, Evelyn held her breath and pushing herself even further against the wall of dirt, as the chameleon brought its head down and one of its eyes began looking through the hole. Luckily there was just enough of a bend that Evelyn was able to escape the line of sight of the chameleon, and it could not find her. However, it was not giving up easily as it began randomly firing its tongue into the hole trying to score a hit on Evelyn. Yet after few dozen tries it quickly gave up on this approach, and Evelyn thought the creature would go away, when she felt the root shake. The chameleon had started bashing its head against the root, trying to loosen the dirt around it before digging out the entrance a bit more. It repeated this process a couple of times and terror began to well up inside Evelyn as she saw the opening become wider and wider. Feeling her instincts kicking in, Evelyn began screeching once again, calling out for help. She felt that there was nothing else she could do other than pray that something, anything, came to save her. But it seemed that her distress only fueled the chameleon on, as it more vigorously smashed against the root and dug with greater intensity. Soon the chameleon had enlarged the hole enough to wriggle its head under the root, and it once again searched for Evelyn. Quickly one of its eyes found her pushed up into a corner, and the other followed suit as it locked both eyes onto its prey. Evelyn then could have sworn she saw a smile on the chameleon's face as it prepared to eat its hard-won meal. Her heart began moving faster, her mind searched for some way to live. But nothing came to her. Closing her eyes, Evelyn felt she could only wait until she was broken between the chameleon's jaws, and hope that next time, if there would be a next time, she might be able to live a better life. A second went by. Then another, and another, but Evelyn still did not feel the chameleon's tongue hit her, followed by being dragged into its mouth. Opening her eyes she looked out in surprise to see a large talon pierced through the chameleon's head, blood gushing out it and a lifeless expression on its face. Chapter 4 Back to Safety. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. With disbelief in her eyes Evelyn stared at the dead chameleon like beast that had nearly eaten her. Currently it had a long sharp talon pierced through its head and had blood flowing down it like a fountain. However, while Evelyn felt relief that the beast that was moments away from eating her was dead, now there was an even greater threat. Whatever had just killed it was many times bigger, and Evelyn knew that if it discovered her, it would be all over. Except as she looked at the talon closely, she realized that it looked familiar, and she believed that it belonged to one of her parents. And just a moment later the large root that she had hidden under began to lift up, and revealed that indeed it was one of her parents who had come in response to the distress call of one of its children. Yet as Evelyn looked up, she saw that it was her new father and not mother, and her warm and hopeful heart turned to ice. Images of what her previous human father came back to her, and as her owl father reached out one of his claws towards her, she winced back instinctively expecting to get hit. Except that is not what happened. Instead, she was picked up in a gentle embrace and her father bent his head over and began ruffling around her feather looking for any injuries. Turning her head to face her new father, Evelyn saw the concern in his eyes and the love that a parent was supposed to have. It was a look she had all but forgotten about, not having seen it once in the last 6 years of her life as a human. Feeling the care that her owl father had for her, Evelyn began crying, not thinking she would ever feel the love of a parent again. Seeing this, her father thought that she was simply grateful to be rescued from a terrifying situation and began rubbing his face against hers while letting out a comforting trill. Of course, this only caused Evelyn to cry even more, as her emotions welled up inside. Eventually Evelyn stopped crying and really looked at her father. Seeing that he himself was a bit injured, and in some places was missing feathers and bleeding. Immediately she wondered what was wrong and remembered that she was able to make her set of stairs to look out of the nest, because her mother had gone in search of her father when he was late returning. Now she realized that he must have gotten into a fight with some other creature and ended up injured. Still, he had come to help her as soon as he heard her distress call even when he was hurt. Nuzzling her head up against her father's, Evelyn let out what she thought would be happy squeaks to let her concerned parent know she was okay. Hoot hoot. Giving some hoots in conversation, her father acknowledged what Evelyn was trying to say and ruffled the top of her head with one of his wings. However, what happened next left Evelyn absolutely speechless, as her father opened up the claw he had picked her up with, and a gust of wind picked her up and placed her onto his back. Witnessing this happen, Evelyn's wide eyes went wider as she looked around in astonishment. She could not understand what had just happened. Was it some kind of freak accident, or naturally occurring phenomenon that happened here? Of course, this was just her mind trying to come up with rational explanations, but quickly she knew what had really just happened. He manipulated the wind somehow. Understanding that there was no other explanation other than that her father was the one controlling the wind, Evelyn looked at him in awe. Certainly, there were plenty of stories that she had read where people manipulated the wind like magic, but she had never expected to see it in real life. She had thought that this world might have been like how Earth was back when the dinosaurs still roamed, and most of the animals were just larger because of higher oxygen levels or something. There is magic in this world, Evelyn thought gleefully. Though while she was lost in her fantasies about what this magical world might be like, her father took off from the ground. She felt herself beginning to shake and threw herself down into his feathers, while trying to grip on with her claws and beak. Holding on for dear life, Evelyn did not want to fall off her father, but soon realized her efforts were pointless. A soft breeze had enveloped around her, preventing her from falling off his back, as he ascended back into the canopy of the forest where their nest was located. Once they had arrived back at the hollow, Evelyn's father lowered his head and another swirl of wind picked Evelyn up and gently places her within the nest. As soon as she touched down, her owl mother rushed over and began inspecting her with a worried expression on her face. However, as Evelyn looked up at her, she saw that her mother was also injured, probably having backed up her father against whatever he had been fighting. Then when she was certain that Evelyn was uninjured, she moved over to the father and the two of them began squeaking and hooting at each other. Watching this, Evelyn was certain that they were having some type of conversation and that the noises they were making held meaning. The two of them would even give occasional glances at her, and Evelyn now truly understood that her parents, unlike her siblings, held a high level of intelligence beyond what she expected from owls. When her parents had finished talking to each other, they both approached Evelyn and her father placed the items she had used to make stairs in front of her. Hoot! Her mother said with a stern tone while shaking her head. Seeing this, Evelyn understood what her parents were trying to say, and she lowered her head and started making remorseful sounds, doing her best to convey that she was sorry. She now understood that her curiosity had nearly gotten her killed, and that her new parents were worried about her. Once Evelyn showed remorse and understanding for her actions, her parents patted her gently on the head. With this emergency now cleared up, Evelyn's new owl family quickly went back to normal as her father flew off somewhere, while her mother began ripping up the chameleon-like beast and feeding it to Evelyn and her siblings. Chapter 5 First Flight and the Magic Stone. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After Evelyn's near-death experience falling out of the tree, she acted like a model baby owl, staying in the nest and not poking her nose into trouble. She simply waited patiently for weeks as her body grew and matured, until it was really time for her and her siblings to be adventurous. Once around 5 weeks had passed since her new life as an owl began, her mother started taking her and her siblings out of the nest and onto the branches of the tree they called home. At this point, Evelyn and her siblings had grown to be around 1 foot to 1.5 feet tall, and their feathers were starting to come in. For the most part they still looked like fluff balls, but the semblance of the owls they would become was now noticeable. Going out onto the branches, Evelyn was very careful. She had already taken one fall down into the forest floor, and she had no desire to do so again while she could not fly. However, unlike Evelyn, her siblings, who were still running mostly on instinct, hopped around like no tomorrow, with no worry of the dangers that lurked below or above. Of course, their bravery came mostly from their mother, who was nearby and watching them, but also that they did not know of the terrors that existed in this world. Over the next few weeks this became their daily routine. Evelyn's new mother would take them out onto the branches of the tree, and slowly but surely take them further and further away so that they would get used to moving around. During this time, it was certain that Evelyn had the most trouble, as she was always on the lookout for anything coming to eat her. Still, after many weeks passed and she did not see even a single creature half the size of her other than her family, she began to relax. Then when around 9 weeks had passed since her hatching, it was time for her and her siblings' first flight. Their feathers had mostly grown in at this point and their bodies were a bit bigger, though still in line with what a normal owl's size would be. Naturally Evelyn wondered about this since her parents were giants, but she had very little knowledge about this world right now. Maybe it would just take some more time, or it had something to do with the magic of this world. Well, I can worry about that later. For now, I have to figure out how to fly. Looking out of her nest, Evelyn saw that her brother and sister were already flapping around, slowly moving from branch to branch while they got a feel for flying. Evelyn on the other hand was still stuck on the lip of the tree hollow, finding it difficult to take the first leap into the open air. She still had lingering fear from her earlier foray down on the forest floor, and she was afraid to fall again. Hoot! Making an encouraging and comforting sound, Evelyn's mother beckoned her to leave the nest. All the while saying that she was here for her. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn steeled her nerves, believing that even if she messed up, her mother would come and help her. Then she leapt out into the air and spread her wings, beginning her first flight. Or at least that was her intention. Except as she flapped her wings around rapidly, she began to plummet. She tried flapping as fast as she could, but no matter how much she wanted to fly, she just kept falling. Panic began to set in, and she looked up towards her mother expecting to see her diving to her rescue. But she was still just perched up in the tree looking down at Evelyn as she fell. Is she not going to save me? Have I been deemed a failure? Evelyn thought, as she counted to fall, and her mother made no move to help her. Seeing that she was not going to be receiving any help, Evelyn with renewed vigor tried to fly, but the best she could do was slow her descent by holding her wings out and gliding. Still, this helped to take away some of the panic and her mind started to clear. Soon, she realized that her problem was that she had been trying to fly instead of doing it. She had been too focused on thinking of how to do it, when she should have let her instincts take over. Her own human mind had been fighting against her owl instincts, and what she needed to do now was to let them take over. Flapping her wings once again, Evelyn did not think but simply let her body react. One flap, then two, then three. She slowly gained a bit of altitude and propelled herself forward onto a nearby branch. Landing after having flown for only an instant, Evelyn began breathing heavily and catching her bearings. For a moment what just happened seemed like a dream, but she had actually flown. It was not much, and it certainly was not impressive, but she had moved through the air under her own power. Still, she had fallen a good 300 feet before finally catching herself and could now see small patches of the forest floor below her. It is going to be a long way back up, Evelyn thought while staring at her mother who was still perched high above. Flapping her wings and getting down the feeling of flying she had just experienced, Evelyn prepared herself to go again. When she was ready, she jumped from her branch and flew up to one a few feet away that was a bit higher up. She continued this process for what felt like hours until she had made it around 200 feet back up towards the canopy. Unfortunately, at this point she was exhausted, and felt she could not fly another inch. Her stomach felt empty and was rumbling, saying that it was time for food, and no more movement was happening until she refueled. Luckily it was at this point that her mother expertly and effortlessly swooped down and picked her up. Not long after her mother had picked her up and brought her back to the nest, Evelyn saw her father return, and in his talons was a massive fish that was around 5 feet long. This was the first time she had ever seen a fish being brought home for dinner, but she was hoping that it might taste good. Thankfully it did, and Evelyn, being quite famished, for the first time chirped along with her siblings for more food. Yet it was after they were done eating that her parents brought out something she had never seen. Within the fish was some type of faintly glowing dark purple stone, that her parents ripped it out for all of them to see. Looking at it, Evelyn wondered what it was exactly, and when her father put it down, she and her siblings approached it. Moving over to it, she looked at it intently and for some reason had the urge to try and eat it. She did not know why she felt like this, but she was not alone as her brother and sister began pecking away it. However, the stone was far too big to fit in any of their mouths and it was durable enough to not be broken by their beaks or talons. Eventually, after they had all had a good look at it, their father picked the stone back up and swallowed it. Seeing this, Evelyn was certain that this was some type of teaching experience her parents were giving them. Though while the importance of that stone went over her siblings' head, and they squawked for it back. Evelyn began thinking. That must have something to do with the magic in this world. I do not know exactly what it is or why it was in that fish, but it must be related. Actually, it also probably has something to do with my parents' enhanced size as well. Maybe eating that stone out of other beasts helps them to grow bigger. While Evelyn was busy speculating the importance of that stone her parents had just shown her and her siblings, she did not notice that their mother had placed out 3 smaller stones. Quickly her siblings ate one each, and then tried to move on to the other one that was meant for Evelyn. Fortunately, her parents held them back and eventually hooted at her to come over. Looking at the much smaller stone that had been laid out, Evelyn hopped over to it and picked it up in her beak. Immediately she felt the urge to swallow it but held off and slowly rolled it around in her mouth. She tested its flavor and texture, wanting to learn what she could about it. Then when she had held off for as long as she could, she swallowed the stone and felt a sort of warm feeling in her stomach. It was quite pleasant and now she knew why her instincts had been beckoning her to consume this stone. Eating it reminded her of a bit of the warm cups of hot chocolate she used to share with her first mother all those years ago. Thinking about this, tears once again flowed down Evelyn's eyes, a mix of both happiness and sadness. Longing for a life she already lost but also looking forward to the new one that would hopefully be better than the last. Chapter 6 The Trap. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Got you. Swooping down from high above the trees, Evelyn nailed her prey that had thought itself hidden among the branches. Sinking her claws in, the poor chameleon-like creature let out a pained screech as Evelyn finished it off. Smiling, she felt a sense of happiness now being able to dispatch a creature of the same species as the one that nearly killed her, though this one that she had just gotten was a juvenile itself, and quite a bit smaller than the other one that was still a slightly bigger than Evelyn was now. Still, for her first solo kill, it brought her great joy that she was able to take out one of these chameleons. To think just 3 weeks after my first flight I would be out hunting like this. I truly feel like an owl now. Evelyn thought while bobbing her head happily. In the last few weeks, she had gotten much better at flying and could do it almost expertly. Now it was close to as easy for her to fly as breathing. Much as how it was for humans with walking after they reached a certain age. Of course, even though she and her siblings were off hunting on their own, that did not mean that they were not under the watchful eyes of their parents. Currently Evelyn's mother was perched high up in the trees watching down at her and her siblings who were all hunting in the same area. With her prey clutched in her talons, Evelyn flew up towards her mother, wanting to show off what she had done. She still longed for her parents' approval that was sorely lacking in her past life, but now her new owl parents heaped on plenty of praise when she did something well. Showing off her first kill, Evelyn held her head up proudly, and as she wanted, her mother nodded her head towards Evelyn, acknowledging her talents and efforts. This made Evelyn happy, and she squawked and hooted joyfully, and her mother joined along. At this point she had gotten pretty good at understanding what the noises her parents made meant and could hold a sort of conversation with them. Certainly, it was far from the level of what humans could express with words, but they were still able to convey feelings and emotions. Yet as Evelyn took up her mother's attention, her brother had wandered off, tracking his prey further than the area they were supposed to operate in. Unfortunately, it took their mother around 10 minutes to finally notice this, as she had been distracted further by Evelyn's sister, who had also caught her first prey. However, once she noticed that her son had strayed off, she took Evelyn and her sister back to the nest and told them to stay there while she searched for their brother. After that, Evelyn's mother swiftly flew out of the nest and began searching the area for her lost son. Sighing, Evelyn looked at her prize and began tearing it apart. Eating the chameleon she had worked hard to catch. When she had finished eating what she could and digging the core within its body out, neither of her parents had returned. At this point it had been quite some time and she was beginning to get worried. Maybe I should go out and join the search, she thought while looking out of the hollow in the tree their nest was in. She could fly now and had become a lot more confident in her abilities as of late. And while she still had not figured out how the magic in this world worked, she had not seen anything other than her parents wield it to begin with. Eventually she began to feel restless, and the waiting around was getting to her. She was torn between staying home where she knew it was safe or going out to search for her new owl brother who had gotten lost. I know that my adventurism got me in trouble before, but this time is different. Hopping up to the exit of the nest, Evelyn jumped up onto the edge of the tree hollow and looked out. She scanned the forest around her and then off into the horizon to see if she could see any of her family members returning. Sadly, none of them were in view and she made the decision to head out herself and join the search. While she was not close in any way to her new siblings, she did not want to lose any of the members of her new family. She was afraid that if one of them were to die it would ruin the happiness that she currently had, just as had happened back on Earth when she lost her mom Elise. Taking off into the forest, Evelyn remembered the direction that her mother had flown off into and went the opposite way. This way they would cover more ground, and hopefully come across her idiot owl brother who had gotten caught up in tracking his fast-moving prey. Flying around she searched in a grid pattern, checking a certain area in a cube before moving on to the next. She counted doing this for what felt like a couple hours, and she made sure to keep track of where she was in relation to the nest so as to not get lost herself. Though as she was beginning to get tired and ready to give up, she heard the sounds of distress. Listening closely, she recognized the sound and understood that it was her brother calling out for their parents. Unfortunately, neither of them were anywhere nearby right now, but Evelyn was. Well, at least he is still alive. Now what kind of trouble has he gotten himself into? Turning towards the noise, Evelyn flew her way around a number of dense trees before coming out into a small clearing in the middle of the forest. But as she stared into the middle of the clearing where her brother was, she stopped flying for a moment in shock. There before her eyes in a metal trap was her brother. It was a type of spring-loaded cage, but much bigger than any she had ever seen and camouflaged fairly well to blend in. Seeing this there was no doubt in her mind that this was a human contraption, and the first sign she had seen of living humans. Of course, she had found the finger bone before, but that only confirmed that there were humans. However, this showed her that they were indeed humans operating in this forest. Regaining her composure after a bit, Evelyn slowly descended down towards the ground, keeping a sharp eye out for any dangers or other traps that might have been laid nearby. When she was fairly certain that it was safe to land, she descended down towards the cage where her owl brother had been captured in a trap. Though as she touched down and he noticed her, he began screeching even louder, begging her to free him. Still, Evelyn had a sharp mind and she planned to use it to examine the situation. Going around and looking at the inside of the cage, she noticed that there were a number of fruits, nuts, and grasses. She wondered why her brother had been attracted to these items when owls very rarely ate anything other than meat. Yet as she bent in closer while looking for the mechanism to open the cage, she smelt the scent coming from these items. Immediately she felt an urge to consume them, similar to the weird stones that were found in beasts. Is it some type of bait they have coated them in, or are these maybe from special plants that hold some type of magical properties? As Evelyn examined the bait that had enticed her stupid brother into what she perceived as an obvious trap, he continued to make a racket wondering why his sister had not already freed him. "Yes, I hear you. Just give me a minute," Evelyn thought, as her brother continued to frantically make distressed noises. Hopping around the cage, she began searching for the mechanism to get it open. Unfortunately, while it would be very simple to open the cage normally, that only went for the humans that had created. In order to open it, Evelyn found that she needed to pull up on 2 levers on opposite sides at the same time, but there was no way she could do so with her current physique. Racking her brain, she thought long and hard about how to help her owl brother out of his cage, and soon came up with an idea. Taking off back into the air, she began looking around intently, trying to find something specific. Ah, there it is. Spotting the vines she was looking for, Evelyn flew over to them and began tugging on them to find the strongest one. Then when she had, she slowly used her talons to cut through it until she had what would make the best rope she could hope to find in the middle of a forest. With the tool she needed now in her claws, she flew back to her brother, who had only gotten louder, thinking that she had abandoned him. Still, Evelyn worked through the noise, and began tying the strong vine to one of the levers before moving on to the next. Though this was easier said than done, as she was now lacking any opposable thumbs. Eventually, after many painstaking attempts, she finally got the vine tied around the levers, and hooked up on top of the cage. Pulling with all her might on the vine, she slowly began to bring the levers up, and with one great yank of her neck, got them to release. As soon as this happened, the door to the cage opened, and her brother quickly jumped out of it, and began chirping happily at Evelyn for saving him. However, unbeknownst to them, someone had been watching quietly as Evelyn worked hard to open the cage. Clap! 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 Hearing 3 resounding claps above her, Evelyn felt a sudden sense of fear greater than she had since becoming an owl. Turning her head around, there she saw it, a living, breathing person, who had hidden himself among the brush and had come out while clapping his hands slowly. Chapter 77 Fleeing from the Humans. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. /n dialogue starting with asterisk means that Evelyn does not understand these words. Asterisk, well, that certainly was something to see. Never thought I would witness a low-tier wild beast being smart enough to open a cage. Asterisk, the man who had just appeared from the brush said while clapping his hands. However, while Evelyn had no clue what he said, she was not focusing on his words to begin with. She knew how scary humans could really be, and she doubted that this man had any good intentions. Since it was likely that he was the one that had left out the trap her brother had gotten caught in. Hoot! Evelyn said as loud and with as much warning as possible. She then bumped her head against her brother with as much force as she could to get him to fly off, while doing the same herself. She had no intention of staying around to find out what this human from this world wanted, and flew away as fast as she could. Yet, the man just smiled as he watched the 2 of them fly off in the opposite direction he had appeared from, since that was exactly where he wanted them to go. As soon as Evelyn and her brother were about to reach the tree line and escape the clearing they were in, both of them heard a whooshing sound coming from above. Looking up, she saw a wide net had been thrown down from the trees and was going to ensnare both her and her brother. Seeing this, Evelyn's adrenaline that was already heightened reached its max, and time almost seemed to slow down for her as she thought of a way to avoid getting caught in this net. She had no intention of ever being restrained again, and the fear of this forced her to take drastic action. From the size of the net and how fast it was falling, she realized that trying to avoid it by flying faster or to the sides was not going to work. So, she dipped her body down and went into a nosedive. Shooting straight down towards the ground, Evelyn made no move to try and stop her fall and smashed hard into the ground. Truly, it hurt like hell for her, but she gritted her beak and took the pain, far more afraid to be caught in the net. Luckily, her reckless maneuver had managed to keep her out of the net and simply a bit injured. Unfortunately, her brother had not been as daring and tried to escape by simply flying faster. Now he was caught in a net that had been thrown by another human that had been waiting in the trees ready to capture both of the owls that had wandered into this clearing. Digging in and really pushing herself, Evelyn got up despite the pain she was feeling, and began running and flapping her wings to get back into the air. Quickly she managed to get some altitude and began flying through the forest, away from the humans that clearly wanted to catch her. Certainly, she had wanted to rescue her brother, but her fear of dying another death from the cruelty of others made her flee with all her might. Damn it, Virgos, you were supposed to catch both of them. Hurry up and secure that one and follow after me when you are done. We are not letting that other one get away. The man who had appeared from the brush said to the one that had been hiding in the trees. Continuing to fly with everything she had, Evelyn made a beeline for her nest, hoping that one of her parents had come back. If she could get their help, she was certain that these two guys would not be a problem. However, as she was flying, she heard a loud snapping sound from behind her, and turning her head around she saw that one of the men was jumping from branch to branch and chasing after her. Immediately Evelyn realized that this was not a feat an ordinary person would be able to accomplish, even if they were a world-class gymnast. No, this person, like her parents, must have been using some type of magic to keep up with her as she flew as fast as she could. Diving down again, Evelyn started attempting very risky maneuvers she had never practiced, like flying through branches that gave her almost no clearance. Still, she felt that it would be the end of her if this man caught her, so she was willing to take any risk to keep him away. Nevertheless, the man moved with more grace and fluidity than would seem possible, and even though she was doing her all to lose him, he was still gaining on her. Soon, he was only around 30 feet away and threw out a bag that exploded into a large net that was aimed to ensnare Evelyn. Miraculously though, she just managed to spin out of the way and put a tree in between her and the man, going around it and cutting off his line of sight. And when the man came around the tree himself, he was flabbergasted to see that his quarry was no longer visible. Where the hell did that owl go? He thought while looking around for Evelyn. Breathing heavily, she looked down from her hiding spot on the tree, having continued circling around it and quickly finding a thick area of leaves to hide in. Of course, she knew she could not hide forever as the man had already begun searching the area for her, but she just needed the right opportunity. She waited and waited for him to turn his attention away, and hopefully move further from her current location. Fortunately, her prayers were answered as the man searched the opposite direction of where she was first. Taking this opportunity, Evelyn, as quietly as she could, pushed herself out of the thick branches and began flying towards the nearest tree in order to use it as a new hiding spot. Yet as she was flying over to it, even though she had hidden herself perfectly from one pursuer, the other who had just caught up spotted her. Before she even noticed, she felt a sharp pain in her left wing before plummeting to the ground. Wham! Slamming against the ground incredibly hard for the second time today, Evelyn had the wind knocked out of her. Feeling incredibly out of it, she felt a terrible weakness and recognized what was happening since it was a familiar sensation. I have been drugged. Looking over towards her wing that had now gone number, she saw a metal bolt from a crossbow embedded in her. No, no, no. I refuse to end up in Qian's again. Summoning up all of her strength, Evelyn fought through the drug and the pain, dragging her body forward and trying to escape. The fear and trauma of the events that had led up to her first death drove her to run away no matter what. Unfortunately, even though she was able to drag herself a few inches, it was not long before the two men that had been hunting her dropped down on either side of her, cutting off any chance of escape. I have to admit that this one's tenacity is pretty high. I do not think that I have ever seen a wild beast continue to fight after having the extract from the moonlight gelsemium enter their system. Virigos said, impressed by Evelyn's will to survive. Yeah, it is unusual, but it does not make a difference. Crawling a few more inches is not going to help them get away from us. The other guy said as he bent down to pick Evelyn up. Yet as he did, the two men heard a loud crashing sound like something very big had just landed above them. And tilting their heads up, the two men saw a massive owl that was 10 feet tall staring down at them with murder in his eyes. As Evelyn's father looked down at two soon-to-be-dead humans harming his children. Chapter 8 Evelyn's Father vs. the Human Hunters. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Launching down from atop the tree he had landed on, Evelyn's father dove right towards the ground right at the two men that had captured two of his children. Yet before he even got to the ground, the red feathers around his neck began to glow, until a half-dozen spears of fire shot out towards the human men. Seeing this, the two of them jumped back, having no time to do anything else in response but move away. In fact, as Evelyn's father had planned, one of the spears hit the net his son was trapped in and burned through it, separating it from the man named Varigos. He then landed on the ground with a loud crash, leaving a huge indent where his claws had touched down. Spreading his wings out, he covered both Evelyn and her brother protectively and let out a menacing screech towards the two humans. Damn it, what the hell is a peak fiend beast doing here in the Deadlands? I do not know, but we need to stay on our guard and keep him pinned down between the younger ones or we are going to be dead meat. After the two men finished their conversation, Varigos pulled out his crossbow and shot towards Evelyn, while the other man named Carson threw two throwing knives at her brother. However, as much as they were hoping this would create an opening for them to attack Evelyn's father, all it did was making him angrier. With one flap of his wings, he created a powerful gust of wind that knocked away the projectiles, before unleashing two blasts of fire at the men. Having to take evasive action again, Varigos rolled out of the way, while Carson jumped into the air and griped onto a tree branch to avoid being engulfed by the fire that singed him as it flew by below. Witnessing this, both of them were in total shock, since they never expected to see a beast that had a dual affinity out here on the edge of the world where magical energy was sparse. Pushing off against the ground and flapping his wings, Evelyn's father burst forward, appearing in front of Carson in an instant. He then brought forth one of his claws and tried to pierce through this despicable human's chest. Though as he brought his claw forward, Carson positioned his right arm in front of himself and the metal band he wore on his arm sprung out into a large square shield. Still, even with the protection of this shield, Carson watched in horror as the talons of this very large owl dug through the metal. A second later, he was pulled down to the ground and slammed against it, fighting with all his might to keep the four talons from stabbing into him. Boom! As Evelyn's father tried to kill one of the humans that were hunting his children. A loud explosion resounded through the forest, and turning his head, he saw that the other human had fired an exploding bolt into the air. This other human then began taking aim at Evelyn, who was paralyzed on the ground and unable to defend herself. He wanted to force Evelyn's father into either saving his children or killing Carson. Luckily, Evelyn's father did as expected, and leapt off of Carson to go and save his children. With this opening, Varigos ran up to his fellow hunter and held out his hand while saying, "Damn it, Carson, I knew we should have run instead of attacking." Taking Varigos' hand, Carson pulled himself up and responded saying, "I know you are not the smartest, Varigos, but you must have seen the look in that thing's eyes. It wants us dead, and if we turn tail and run we have no chance of getting out of this alive. Our only option is to keep the fight near its kids to restrain it and hope we get lucky." Resolving themselves to fight to the end, Varigos and Carson turned to face Evelyn's father, who had once again placed himself over his fallen children. Yet this time he was not going to risk leaving his position while these two humans were in range to hurt Evelyn or her brother. Instead, he began whipping up the wind and sent out a large gale towards the two humans. Unable to evade this wide attack, both Varigos and Carson were pushed off balance, losing their footing. To follow up, Evelyn's father sent out another half-dozen spears of fire towards Varigos, who was the less nimble of the two. Bracing himself, Varigos pulled out a large club that was on his back and tried knocking the flames away. Nevertheless, even with his best efforts he failed to block or dodge all of the fire spears, and two of them impacted against his body. One hit against his left shoulder while the other hit him on his right side, causing horrible burns that melted his flesh. Feeling this pain, Varigos fell to the ground and began rolling around while screaming in agony. Seeing this, Carson, who had just managed to regain his footing from the earlier wind attack, clicked his tongue. He knew that if Varigos died he would be next, so he opened up his jacket and began rapidly throwing every knife he had on him towards Evelyn and her brother. To his fortune, this was just enough to keep Evelyn's father occupied as he ran over to Varigos. When he arrived, he threw 8 knives all at once, which was the most he could do with any sort of accuracy. Then he pulled out a jar from one of his pockets and threw it onto the ground. As the glass-shattered smoke began to fill the area, and he dragged himself and Varigos over to a nearby tree to use it as cover. Though before he could even get there, a gust of wind blew away the smoke, and was followed up by another round of flame spears. Ugh! As he was pushing himself and Varigos behind the tree, Carson got hit in the foot by one of the flame spears and had to grit his teeth through the pain as his shoes and flesh burned. At the very least he was able to pull himself and Varigos behind the tree and use it as momentary cover. Now that they were in relative safety, Carson pulled out 3 vials that were in a pouch on his belt and poured the contents over his and Varigos' injuries. Slowly the horrible burns began to heal, and the pain subsided greatly. However, this moment of reprieve was short-lived, as Evelyn's father had no intention of letting these humans live. Sending out shot after shot of fire, he bombarded the tree and the area around it, setting the hiding spot of these humans on fire. He then whipped up another gust of wind to speed up the spread of the fire and increase its intensity. Of course, he also could have simply flown over to these humans to finish them off, but he had seen that they were crafty and did not want to expose his children to any more danger. Therefore, he continued to blast the tree and the area the humans were hiding in, planning to smoke them out into the open or burn them alive where they hid. Well, Varigos, I did not want it to come to this, but you run one direction, and I will run the other. If we are lucky one of us will survive. Carson said, seeing as how they were out of options. Nodding his head, Varigos agreed. But he really did not like their chances against a beast that could fly and was much faster than either of them, especially now that they were both injured. Standing up, the two of them prepared to run away in opposite directions as the forest around them burned. When suddenly, they heard another voice coming from in front of them. I see that you 2 idiots have gotten yourselves into a heap of trouble. I cannot believe that you were able to mess up the simple job of checking the traps and retrieving whatever was caught inside. Chapter 99 Fight for Their Lives. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As this other human approached and saw his 2 idiot subordinates about to be engulfed by fire, all he could do was sigh. Still, he had only so many men at his disposal out here in the far reaches of the world, so it was in his best interest to save them quickly. He began moving his hands in a practiced manner, and when he had finished weaving his spell, he conjured it into reality by speaking its name. Stone Circle. Finishing his spell, the man's hands began to glow, and the ground around him began to shift and move before creating a ring around him and his men. This forced the flames that were growing ever closer to halt their advance as they found no purchase against the solid rock. You 2 really are a pair of unlucky idiots. Though I suppose it was not so bad since I was close enough to hear your signal. But still, how in the world did you anger one of the maybe couple dozen fiend beasts in this forest, and a peak one at that? The obviously much stronger man said. Lowering their heads, Carson said, we were only doing as ordered and collecting the beasts caught in the traps, when one managed to escape with the help of an unusually smart wild beast. Yeah, we simply were chasing them down to recapture them when that monster of a beast showed. And Elder Uriah, what gives? I thought this place could not even properly support a fiend beast. Varigos said with confusion. Sighing, Uriah said, you 2 nitwits need to read the intel reports more thoroughly. You are right that this place has next to no chance to produce any fiend beasts, but that does not mean that there are not any that live here. A few stronger beasts occasionally migrate here in order to rear their young in a safer environment. The 3 men then continued to talk, and Evelyn's father, who had been eyeing the situation warily, decided now was the time to make a move. He could tell that this new human was strong, far stronger than the other 2. It was uncertain if he would stand any chance, so while the man's attention was on the 2 others, Evelyn's father grabbed both her and her brother and took to the sky. However, even though the man seemed to be preoccupied elsewhere, he had always had the bulk of his focus on Evelyn's father. The second he had begun to flee, the man smiled and finished casting the spell he had already been preparing. Hands of Earth. When the man finished his second spell, two large hands reached up from the ground and with greater speed than would have seemed possible, they caught up to Evelyn's father. Seeing this, he knew he had no hope of evading without losing his children. So, he pulled Evelyn and her brother in tight while wrapping his wings around them as another layer of protection. Wham! The two hands clapped together in midair, crushing Evelyn's father in between them. Breaking apart and falling away, after the two hands of dirt had collided together, the force was too much for them to maintain their shape. Nevertheless, they had already accomplished their job, and falling down with them was Evelyn's father. After taking that powerful attack, even as sturdy as he was, he had not come out unharmed, with one of his wings being broken, while the other was badly injured. There was absolutely no way he was going to be able to fly again anytime soon, leaving him only one option: to fight. Pulling himself up, he put Evelyn and her brother down on the ground behind him, releasing them from the safe embrace of his claws. He needed everything he had to face down his current enemy, especially now that his wings were injured. Yes, I think this one will make an excellent specimen. The researcher is likely to be thrilled when I present him with such a beast. Uriah said as he looked at his prize. Screeching loudly into air, Evelyn's father began glowing red-hot as heat built up around him. He was summoning all of the remaining power he had for one final attack to try and take out this human. Still, the man named Uriah just continued to advance, paying little mind to the dangerous buildup of power around Evelyn's father. When he had accumulated all of his strength, Evelyn's father aimed forward, and a pillar of flames shoot forth from his body. The fire engulfed everything in its path, burning the brush of the forest as it burst forward towards Uriah. Granite wall. As Uriah cast the defensive spell he had already prepared, a large wall rose up from the ground in front of him and easily blocked the fire being fired off from Evelyn's father. Smiling, Uriah put his hand on the wall, and began pushing forward, heading right towards Evelyn's father despite the pillar of fire blasting against him. Yet as he was advancing, his honed senses of years of battle alerted him to a new danger, and he jumped back right as a blade made of wind crashed into the spot he had been standing a second ago. However, Uriah did not have time to try and ascertain where this new attack came from, as Evelyn's father turned his all-or-nothing attack towards him now that he was no longer behind his protection. Clicking his tongue, Uriah was now feeling a bit of pressure, but he still easily evaded Evelyn's father's attack with swift movement that no normal person should have been able to accomplish. There you are. Finding the other attacker, he saw another large owl flying around and sending wind blades at him from different angles to restrict his movement. Still, even though he was having to stay on his toes a bit, he was only feeling slightly pressured. This one is kind of a pain, but I should end this quickly before one of them ends up killing themselves. Uriah thought as he continued to dart around, avoiding the onslaught of both of Evelyn's parents. Rock form. Finishing his latest and most complicated spell, Uriah's body began to be covered up by the ground, and when it receded, he was completed, enveloped by rocks looking like some type of monster. At the very least, this allowed Evelyn's parents to finally hit with their attacks as he had stopped moving while the spell activated its effect. Quickly he was engulfed by the pillar of fire Evelyn's father was emitting, and Evelyn's mother stopped and began flapping her wings rapidly to send down a barrage of wind blades. Yet even after being swallowed by fire and pelted by blades of wind strong enough to slice through bone, Uriah had not taken any damage. Jumping out of the flames, he rocketed towards Evelyn's mother, who had finally stopped moving to launch a full offensive. Rapidly moving his arms, Uriah deflected all of the wind blades coming at him with the thick rock armor that protected him. Then he slammed into Evelyn's mother using his own body as a projectile, and a sickening crack resounded throughout the area. Evelyn's mother coughed up a mouthful of blood as her bones shattered and her internal organs ruptured from the impact. Grabbing onto her, Uriah pulled Evelyn's mother down to the ground with him and left a crater where he landed. With a hostage now in his hands, he smiled under his helmet made of rock and began walking forward, dragging Evelyn's mother with him. Now it would be impossible for Evelyn's father to attack without hurting his partner, and wavering for a moment he lost control of the power he was barely clinging onto. His magical energy completely exhausted, he collapsed to the ground, no longer able to even hold his head aloft as Uriah approached him. Well, you put up a pretty good fight, but it is over. Now why don't you go to sleep, and when you wake up, I will have prepared a nice, new home for you all. Uriah said as he lifted his foot up. Smashing down with a tremendous amount of force, he crushed Evelyn's father's head into the ground and rendered him unconscious. Chapter 1010 The Facility. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Looking out in horror, Evelyn watched as her mother and father were quickly and overwhelmingly beaten down by this new human that had arrived. They had fought together and with everything they had and were still crushed in less than a minute without having inflicted a single injury on their opponent. Seeing this, tears rolled down Evelyn's eyes when she realized that all hope was lost. Her parents were unconscious, and she was out of commission as the paralytic drug had completely immobilized her body, but still left her awake to watch whatever cruel fate awaited. For a moment she even thought about trying to pray for a miracle, but she knew those did not exist. Since never once had her prayer for one been answered in this or her last life. Okay, you two, the fight is over, so you can stop cowering. Now get over here and tie them up while I contact the base to send us help to transport these beasts. Uriah called out to Varigos and Carsin. Tentatively the two of them moved out from behind the tree they were hiding behind, and once they saw that the two large owls that were stronger than them were truly down, they ran up to Uriah, who had just shed his rock form. The two of them then pulled out some ropes from their bags and began tying up Evelyn's parents, while Uriah pulled out a fancy-looking notebook. Writing within this notebook, Uriah asked for some more men to help him bring back the prizes he had just acquired. Once he had finished writing this message, he watched the text disappear as it was transmitted to his compatriot who had a similar magical tool for long-range communication. After that was done, he moved over to one of the nearby trees and leaned against it. He was currently feeling pretty sore, which happened every time he used his rock form spell. Still, it was the strongest magic he had, and without it the fight was likely to have prolonged, which he did not want. A little over half an hour later, a dozen more people showed up at Uriah's location and saw Evelyn's parents. Of course, most of them were surprised because they were definitely the strongest beasts any of them had seen since being assigned to this area. Now that all of you are here, split into two groups of 6 and carry the two larger owls back to base. Varigos and Carsin, you two grab the children and try not to mess up this time. Uriah said, taking command. Quickly the new men that arrived had picked Evelyn's parents up, while Varigos grabbed Evelyn's brother and Carsin took a hold of Evelyn, who was as still as a statue. Elder Uriah, are you sure we need these two beasts when we have the other two? This one here really gave me the runaround, and nearly got us killed by leading its parents to us. I would be really grateful if I could take out my frustration on it. Carsin said as he held up Evelyn. Rolling his eyes, Uriah looked at Carsin like he was the epitome of stupid, and said, Sure, you can kill it, but then I will kill you. Right now, the researcher is looking for quantity and wants every beast we capture to run his tests. So, killing a beast we caught no matter how weak is the same as destroying his property. Lowering his head, Carsin grumbled under his breath and did as he was ordered. He dragged Evelyn along, holding her up by her injured wing to make the trip as unpleasant for her as possible. During this time, Evelyn had given up and lost all hope, coming to accept that her lot in life was to suffer. All she could wish for now was that whatever was about to happen to her would be over quickly and as painlessly as possible. Maybe when I die again, I will get a better third life. Or this could be the hell I have to suffer for eternity. I will get to start out with a happy and hopeful life, all for it to be ripped away by circumstance I cannot control. Being taken along, all Evelyn could do was watch, not even able to close her eyes due to the paralytic drug in her system. It felt like a horribly long journey as the humans that had taken her trekked through the woods, and she was in constant pain from the rough hold on her injured wing. They had not even bothered to take the bolt out, and it sent waves of pain through her every time the man carrying her took a step. Eventually though, they finally came to a stop in what seemed a completely unremarkable part of the forest. Yet it was not long after they stopped, that Evelyn saw a large hatch opening up in the ground and revealing a set of stairs. The men then all began shuffling down, taking Evelyn's parents who barely fit in first. Finally, Carson was the last one to enter with Evelyn in his hands, and she looked up towards the sky, thinking that this would be the last time she would see sunlight in this life as the hatch closed behind them. Looking around, she tried to occupy her mind by analyzing the building she had been brought to, but it was incredibly sterile. So far all she had seen were stone walls that were periodically lined with some sort of dim lights. Occasionally they did pass by some doors, but they never stopped at any of them as they dragged Evelyn and her family down this long corridor. Soon, they came to the end of the corridor, and in front of them was a large set of double doors that had an ominous feel to them. Evelyn even seemed to get a sense of dreadful déjà vu. She felt that this place had a similar feel to the cellar the psycho who killed her in her past life. It was a place where painful tortures waited for her. Bang! 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 Knocking on the door, Uriah waited for an answer, and soon a short man who was wearing a long black robe opened the door. Ah, I see you have brought the new special specimens with you, Elder Uriah. The master will be most pleased to have them. Oh, and he is currently conducting his experiments, so please try not to make a racket. Now come, we have prepared the necessary containment areas for those two. As for the others, just throw them in the cages along with the rest of the wild beasts we have. After this new little man appeared, Evelyn was watched intently as she was brought into the room. She wanted to see what awaited her, and what she saw was certainly terrifying. Rows and rows of cages lined the walls, and in most of them was some manner of beast. They ranged from smaller animals like rats, up to 6-foot-long boars with huge tusks. However, while she was still trying to look around and figure out what exactly was going on here, the man carrying her suddenly stopped. He then opened up one of the cages that was empty, and unceremoniously threw Evelyn in with much more force than necessary. This was the last thing she remembered, before feeling an incredible pain as her head hit the back of the cage and she slipped into unconsciousness.